As usual routine, I'm going to have 15 minutes of questions, so line yourselves up behind the mics and we'll put those questions to Tom. Tom, at one point I'll just pick up on from the start. You're talking about the future, you're talking about prevention, putting more effort into prevention. Do you have anything particular in mind that might help both the members out here and the public they all serve?
I think one of, and this is germane to the last discussion, one of the most effective means of preventing crime is preventing reoffending, and therefore rehabilitation that takes place in prison. That's not within our jurisdiction, but it is part of the inspectorates of the criminal justice system. Rehabilitation in prison, where it is possible, and some people are just persistent, prolific offenders, and that's acknowledged, is extremely important. And I do question whether or not the resources and the will is there always to engage in effective rehabilitation programs. There are very few. Our prison population is upwards beyond 80,000. There are fewer than 100 people in prison today who are never getting out. Everyone else is getting out someday. Wouldn't it be a good idea if every effort were made to ensure that they don't commit offences? Because demand reduction, and rehabilitation is a key part of that, demand reduction is the most efficient use, most efficient way of police time being saved.
Once again, it's something that will require money. We all know about the strict times in which we live. I mean, do you think you have the government on side in this regard?
All governments believe in rehabilitation, but it is variable as to the resources and the will that is shown. I believe this government does take rehabilitation very seriously, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating. OK, let's go to our question. Gentleman on microphone 4. Tell us who you are, sir, where you're from, and the point you'd like to make for Tom Winsor.
Thank you. Doug Campbell, Sergeant from Gloucestershire. I rise on my own behalf. Mr. Winsor, you're going to have to accept an apology from me to start with. I want to talk about Part 1 and Part 2 of your report. Basically, you were a formal rail regulator, and you're seen by your recommendations to many of my colleagues as being the Dr. Beeching of policing. Do you accept that you went too far, too fast, and consequently damaged the trust of police officers with the current government? With hindsight, would you have done anything differently? OK. Did you hear that, Tom?
Yes.
OK. Your response?
The short answer is no and yes. I don't accept that I'm the Dr. Beeching of policing because the police service is going to be made more efficient and effective if the recommendations that I've made are implemented, and some of them are not being implemented or being implemented in different ways. And that is disappointing, but that is the reality of the negotiating machinery. I don't think we went too far or too fast. I would have liked to have gone further in some respects. For example, I would have liked to have made it more flexible for chief officers to bring in people who had significant life experience, job experience somewhere else at higher parts of the pay scale than they can at the moment. I would have liked to have been able to do that, but we didn't go that far. But I believe that in the context of the economic conditions that we face, and the Treasury gave me no figure for savings. Savings was one of the factors that I had to balance, but the main purpose was producing more modern management practices. We found £1.1 billion worth of savings from the police pay bill over 3 years. If the Treasury had had their way, they would have said, there's £1.1 billion, we'll have all of that. But I thought that that was unfair and was not consistent with the other criteria which I was given, which were modern management practices and more efficient and effective police service for the future. So I recommended that 635 million of those 1.1 billion be redirected into policing, in new allowances, in the unsocial hours payment, in the expertise professional accreditation allowance, in improvements in maternity pay, and so on, so that the officers doing the hardest jobs in the unsocial hours conditions and the ones demanding the most onerous professional skills would be rewarded for what they do. Okay. And 425 million went back to the Treasury. If the Treasury had had their way, they would have had the lot.
He doesn't regret anything. He would have done more, not less. What's your response to that, sir?
Well, my response to that is I've got a couple of examples for Mr. Winsor. The £19,000 starting pay, a reduction of £4,000 for new entrants. Already we're seeing inequality coming into the service. I had the honour and pleasure of working on a shift with a mixed workforce of police officers and police staff. 2 young police staff, basically they don't have a mortgage, no family. They've joined the job, but they've taken a £12,000 pay cut to join. Now, your argument would be, well, there are no shortage of people who want to join, so £19,000 is acceptable. That's okay, but I've got a third member of staff who is an experienced special constable, would have loved to have joined the service, but is middle-aged, has a family, has a mortgage, and now finds it totally impossible. He's excluded himself because he couldn't afford to take that sort of hit. And moving on from that, what we now have is a number of chief officers around the country, including a number of chief officers from surrounding forces in Gloucestershire, have decided not to implement your recommendation of the £19,000. And in effect, we now have inequality whereby people who, when they have the opportunity to join the service, will make a choice. And Gloucestershire might not necessarily be in the first division when they go to make their job application. OK, point taken. What about that? £90,000 less than a Marks and Spencer's training manager, apparently, and by advocating the structure you advocated, you're actually denying the service good quality people. Is the allegation.
£19,000 is higher than the starting salary for officer cadets in the Army and for prison officers, and it is not much lower than the salary for graduate officer cadets, firefighters, nurses, paramedics and teachers, all of whom require much higher qualifications to get into the service than you do presently require to get into the police. However, the £19,000 only applies to new recruits who do not have an accredited policing qualification, have not been a special and have not been a community support officer. The £19,000 only lasts for 6 months. After they finish their basic training, which can be up to 26 weeks, they go on to £21,000. And then they ascend the pay scale in 6 steps, not 9 or 10. So they get up to £36,500, provided they pass the foundation and specialist skills thresholds, much faster. The special constable that you mentioned says he can't afford to join the police on, it would be 21,000, not 19, that he would be joining on, instead of the present 23.5. Needs to make a calculation about the security of the job, about the rewards of the job, of course, and also the ascent of the pay scale that they're going to face. Also, chief officers are not ignoring the £19,000 recommendation because it was £19,000 with flexibility according to local labour market conditions. And they're making that judgment on local labour market conditions. OK,
you'll understand why I'm moving on, so, but I think you've had 2 shots there because we've got several people waiting. A gentleman in the middle on microphone 3, make your point, please. Tell us who you are as well.
Thank you, Dennis Weeks from the Metropolitan. Could I ask the Inspector, can you tell me, is the ethics of paying conditions of police officers and the implementation of paying conditions of police officers something which the Inspectorate would look at? And what I mean is that the reforms that have been made, the current paying conditions of officers, how they're applied and how, on many occasions, money that officers are entitled to is not given to them, or they are told they will not receive when they should receive it. Could
you give me an example of what you're talking about? Because I honestly don't know what you mean by that, but other people will. But can you clarify it for me?
Certainly. Overtime. Classic example where people are working beyond their hours and not being paid for it and told there is no money to be paid and therefore effectively bullied out of being paid. They're entitled to those payments. They're doing the work that's required of them and the payment's not there. Do you think that's an ethical issue the Inspectorate should be looking at? Because it seems to me if we do that to our own in processes which are in place in legislation, how else are we applying those ethics?
Thank you. I now understand. Tom?
It's not the role of the Inspectorate to review the pay and conditions because they are a function of police regulations, as you know. So the levels of pay, including the overtime rates, are not a matter for HMIC. But it would be of importance to the Inspectorate if the regulations are being misapplied so as the word you use is bullying people into not claiming things they are legally entitled to do. Bullying is inimical to efficiency and effectiveness. It depresses morale, it leads to inequalities, and it almost certainly diminishes the effectiveness of the police.
That's your answer. Thank you very much indeed. Do you want to come back quickly?
No, I'll be in touch with his office. I'll send some...
Well, do. That's the whole purpose of this forum. Thank you very much. Lady down here, tell us who you are.
Sarah Leach from Devon and Cornwall, and I rise on my own behalf. Mr. Winsor and anybody who thinks about applying for the police service, there is no security for police officers. Because if you get injured and you cannot work, most forces are now trying to force those officers out under unsatisfactory performance procedures. And if involuntary severance comes in, they will be thrown out with the rubbish, and they will not be employable, and they will not get any compensation through the criminal injuries.
This is because they've been put on restricted duties and they failed the fitness test, you mean, for 2 years running and taking a pay cut. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, we have officers who've been injured on duty and are being told that they are going to face unsatisfactory performance procedures, which will ultimately lead to them being pushed out of the organisation with no financial recompense, and that is totally disgraceful and totally against police regulations. Mr. Winsor, are you going to do anything about that now and assure our members that we have some protection when we risk our lives and our health every day?
That's very clear. Okay.
If officers are permanently disabled from working as a police officer, then they should be ill health retired. If they have been injured, but they're still doing work which require police powers or expertise, then they should continue to be paid as a police officer with reasonable adjustments made to accommodate their injury. If that officer can only do police staff work, then he should be paid for that police staff work. But if he has been injured on duty, and that is the reason why he cannot do what a police officer, the job requiring police powers and so on, then the injury awards should be made to police officers injured in the course of duty, so as to, in addition to pension, if they're coming up for pension, to compensate them for their loss of earnings. In other words, they should be financially neutral to the consequences of the injury which has prevented them from continuing as a police officer.
Why are you
and
saying
if
that?
Police forces are violating those provisions of police regulations, then that is illegal.
Do you have any example of this you can put to Mr. Winsor after this forum?
Yes, there is. We have a number of examples, and I think if there's a show of hands, I suspect there's other forces that are facing similar problems.
All right, hands up all the members of other forces who've had a similar experience or whose colleagues have had a similar experience, right? Well, there's quite a few, and I think, would you welcome their evidence?
Well, the primary source, the primary redress that you have is if senior officers are violating the police regulations, then the Federation needs to take up that case, and if necessary, make the case collectively on behalf of several officers so that injury awards and ill health pensions are awarded.
So your first
that's what the scheme is there for doing. It appears that your remarks are somewhat connected to the last remarks, which is that there is improper behaviour and bullying taking place and people are not getting what they're entitled to. They're entitled to this money. Let's adhere to police regulations, not violate them or ignore them.
So your first step with the Federation, you've raised the point very well, and Tom's listening. Let's go to the gentleman, microphone 4 over there. Yes, sir, tell us who you are.
Yeah, I'm Mike White from Wiltshire Police. Sorry, you caught me off guard then. I thought you were going over there.
Just go a bit closer to the mic if you could, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to buck the trend and ask you a question about your current role as HMIC. Having worked within a department managing HMIC visits to my own force in the past, I'm aware that many officers are carefully briefed to ensure that they paint a positively skewed picture of the force. Could I ask your commitment that when HMIC come and visit forces in the future, that they engage fully with the local Fed so that we can give you a more balanced view of what's going on in our forces?
We are only interested in the truth. We are not interested in embroidery. We will and wish to listen to those who have real experience with hard facts. We will proceed on the basis of evidence, not suspicion, not supposition, and certainly not polish. And of course, we don't just listen to what the top teams say and accept it as true. We test what they're saying, we do sampling, we do other kinds of investigation to ensure that what we're getting is hard evidence rather than anything else. We also have the power, and we have new powers to obtain information, and we will be doing more in the way of unannounced inspections.
Would you be, I mean, do you, in the course of your investigations, and would you in the future, to put it bluntly, put yourself about in the canteen, for example, and go unsolicited and unannounced into the canteen and talk to the guys, assuming they've still got a canteen.
We've heard of the quality of food that's available, so how could we resist?
But you would? Are you prepared to do that?
I don't go on inspections, but I do go on forced visits. And when I've done the forced visits, and I'm trying to get around all 43, but it's taking a while because there's 43 of them and one of me, I haven't always been successful, but I try to meet frontline officers and ask them, what is it that gets in the way of doing your job? What bugs you about what your senior management are doing? All the frustrations, all the obstacles, because the infrastructure and support around the constable, the quality of supervision and support that he's getting from higher ranks is absolutely critical to efficiency and effectiveness. So yes, I would like to spend more time with frontline cops than I do with ACWO officers. I try to make it equal.
We're getting to the end of our 15 minutes. That gentleman's been waiting a long time on microphone 2. Yes, sir. Make your point. Tell us who you are.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Winsor. Jeff Mapps from Gwent Police Federation. I'm hoping that you're slightly better briefed than the Home Secretary was this morning. You're clearly intent on reviewing gaps in public services across England and Wales, I would assume. Can you explain to the conference which elements you will be speaking to in Welsh Government and how you will do that?
I misheard your question. I thought you were inviting me to speak in Welsh.
You can do that if you want to.
I can't. I haven't been to Wales yet in my new job. I did go to Carmarthen when I was doing the police pay review to meet frontline officers and also the ACPO team. I have to say the rail service in Wales was not as good as it ought to have been. But
who do you blame for that?
We will be... I'm sorry?
Who do you blame for that?
I wish that the £22.2 billion cheque that I wrote in December 2003 had been better spent by Network Rail.
Cheap shot on my part, but come on, answer his point.
Very cheap. But not unanswerable. Wales, the Welsh Government, we will be speaking to the relevant senior officials and ministers in the Welsh Government. I'm going to South Wales quite soon, I think in the next couple of weeks, for a meeting of the other inspectorates in the criminal justice system to discuss our programme in the future. I hope to be meeting Welsh ministers at the same time. I'm also going to go to South Wales in relation to their use of technology, which I understand is very advanced and could be an exemplar for other forces. They also do it well in Hampshire, Cambridgeshire and other places. So the answer is yes, I'm going to Wales and I will speak to anyone and everyone I need to. But I would most like to speak to frontline officers.
We did agree 15 minutes and we've done it now, but I'll take one more if that's okay with you. Tom, the gentleman up there has been waiting for a long time. On microphone 1, my apologies to those who didn't get in. Gentlemen, on microphone 1.
Good afternoon, conference. Mike Roberts, Kent JBB. Government sets one target for us. HMI set many others. My question is on preventative measurement. Kent has removed all numerical targets from PDRs for officers, and we're now focusing on service delivery. How does the HMI propose to measure the productivity of prevention of policing, and will this create further targets?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Tom?
HMIC don't set any targets. We have regard to the policing and crime plan set by your Police and Crime Commissioner, and they may contain internal targets. We understand that. But the measurement of the productivity of the police is an extremely complex thing to do. In other safety-critical monopoly essential public services, it's relatively easy to do, the price and quality of electricity or transport services or whatever it is. The productivity of the police, the complexity of the product that you produce is, of course, enormously important. And as we heard from a questioner this morning in relation to the Home Secretary, a great deal of that does not lead to the arrest of a person. It relates to keeping someone safe and the prevention of a crime, the prevention of harm to a vulnerable individual. So as part of our valuing the police service, we are, and this is under my leadership, assessing the method of measuring the productivity of the police, including how we measure the value of prevention. And of course, crime figures are a key measure of prevention. What were the crime figures last year and what are they this year? How do they compare to the most similar forces? And of course, do they bear a corresponding relationship to the British Crime Survey as well as the police recorded crime, because there's two sets of different figures. So it's a complex matter. We are looking at it very hard.
Are you happy for more?
Yes, I'll
Paul,
keep going.
because we've waited a long time. And Paul Davis.
Hi, Mr. Winsor. Paul Davis, member of number 4 region. We have met on a number of occasions. I'm over here, Tom.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. Sorry, Tom, I have this every year with them. Sorry. My question is, we've talked about all the things, new technology, preventative measures, freeing up police time and everything else. I've sat through, on behalf of the Joint Central Committee, all of the work involving Windsor 1 and Windsor 2, really tight time frames. All I'd like to know, and I think a lot of our members want to know, what time frame are you putting on some of these recommendations that you're putting forward in terms of the work that's going to be undertaken by HMIC? We need to know that, because what's happening in policing everywhere else, austerity cuts and everything else, we don't want to be caught out. And can we have a plan from you in terms of time that's going to be spent between now and the next election? You know, what is your time frame, please? Please let us know so we can work together to try and help you with some of those things. Thank you.
Okay, this is the last one, Tom.
Okay. You put that in the context, it's a question about HMIC's work, but you put it in the context of Windsor 1 and Windsor 2, as it's called, as if there were some notion that there's going to be a Windsor 3. I have to give you this unconditional promise: there isn't going to be. I think 2 is enough.
Can I say?
But
that wasn't
serious point. No,
that wasn't the point. The point was, we had Windsor 1.
Yes.
We had Windsor 2. Really tight timescales. We've sat through lots and lots of meetings and everything else. The work of the HMIC, if we see it that's important, tell us what your time frame is for some of this work that you say is going to change the police service and bring about better efficiency in the service.
Okay. The timescale. We've just finished consultation on our inspection plan for 2013-14. It finished on the 7th of May. We've received a number of representations. We're going to chew them over, then we're going to finalise the programme, put it to the Home Secretary for her approval, and get on with it. It contains timescales. Not all the inspections that we're going to do are going to take a year. Let me just run through very, very quickly the subjects that we are expecting to be doing in the next year to 18 months to 2 years. Freeing up police time, crime prevention, child sexual exploitation and abuse, stop and search, strategic policing requirement, police attendance, leadership and culture, crime data integrity, human trafficking, European arrest warrants, efficiency and effectiveness through the Valuing the Police programme, and then the commissions that come in from the Home Secretary and the PCCs. It's not a small programme. Some of those are big commissions, some of them are not so big. Some of them will be completed within a year, some of them will take much longer to do. And in the inspection programme, there is a proposed timescale for each one of those. Now, we've consulted on it, and it may be that if we get lots of commissions in from the Home Secretary or the Police and Crime Commissioners, some aspects of that programme are going to have to slip because we don't have unlimited resources. We can flex our resources a little bit, but not completely. So that plan is in place. But let me just make this final point. HMIC is an inspectorate, not a regulatory authority. We do not have hard power, the power to order chief constables, PCCs, or whoever to do things, to take certain measures, or to stop doing things in particular ways. We cannot impose financial penalties. We cannot allocate resources. We cannot issue licenses, modify them, enforce them, or withdraw them. That's what regulators do. I know, I used to be one. The power of HMIC is soft power. The power of HMIC is in its voice and the authority with which it speaks. But if a chief constable gets an adverse report from HMIC, then he's in trouble, because he's going to be answerable to his police and crime commissioner, as well as his local force, his local media, and other pressures. So it's extremely important that that's understood. We can't order things to happen. We can recommend, but it is for other things. The democratic accountability model provides for the Home Secretary and the police and crime commissioners as elected, democratically elected public officials to hold the chief constables to account. final point, if I may make generally to conference, is as has been mentioned, I used to regulate the railways, and now I'm in this job. In that job, previously, I had hard power. I wrote a cheque for £22.2 billion against the will of the Chancellor on the Chancellor's chequebook in my last 6 months of office. Didn't make me many friends in government, but it was necessary to do it. I don't have anything like that amount of power in this job, but I find that this job weighs much more heavily on my shoulders than that job for 2 reasons. Policing affects everyone. And everything on my desk, in one way or another, has risk attached to it. And that's not the risk that some large corporation will or will not make a certain amount of money. It is the risk of the safety of the public. That is an immense responsibility, and I intend to discharge it to the very best of my ability with your assistance.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very, very much indeed for your question. I'm sure you'd like to thank Tom Winsor for his response as well and the time he's taken to be here. Thank you.